Russia is not a great power. Russia is in the lower echelon of second-rate powers, and they would be a third-rate power except for the fact that they possess nuclear weapons and a strategically relevant level of oil and gas reserves. They have a pretty good navy, at least a better one than they had 117 years ago when they were getting humiliated by the Japanese at the Battle of Tsushima. But as we have talked about before, their ability to bring their naval assets to bear is hampered by their shortage of shore installations that are ice-free the whole year round. When they seized Crimea, the reasoning wasn't difficult to see. If the Russian Black Sea Fleet doesn't have the port of Sevastopol to operate out of, that is a strategically disastrous situation for them. In one fell swoop, that could knock Russia down from second-rate power to third-rate power. Now, from the dissolution of the Soviet Union all the way up until Putin grabbed Crimea in 2014, so for 25 years, basically, Russia still had Sevastopol, but they were renting it from the Ukrainians. And each time the American puppets defeated the Russian puppets in a Ukrainian election, the new leaders of Ukraine would start making a bunch of noise about letting the lease expire and throwing Russia out of Sevastopol. So if you're Vladimir Putin, and you're interested in maintaining the illusion that you're a great power, you cannot run the risk of losing that port. So he decided to forestall any further uncertainty on the matter by just grabbing the whole of Crimea. And do you remember how long it took for Russia to complete that annexation? It took 38 days, 5.5 weeks, to conquer a spit of land that they already controlled the southern half of, and where much of the population in the northern half was favorably predisposed to the idea of being under Russian control instead of Ukrainian control. Which brings us neatly along to another inconvenient fact about Russia's military history. Their ground forces are not all that good. And yeah, I know, the standard rejoinder is, what are you talking about? What about World War II? Didn't the Red Army chase the Germans all the way back to Berlin? And yes, they did. But only after the Germans had spent 2 solid years punching themselves out, after they'd had 500,000 men killed and a further 100,000 taken prisoner in the Stalingrad campaign alone, not to mention all the men and equipment they had pointlessly sacrificed at Kursk and on the outskirts of Moscow and at Leningrad and the Western Caucasus and so on. But it was after all that, when the Wehrmacht had been reduced to a desiccated husk of itself and could barely even be described as an effective fighting force anymore, it was only then that the Red Army was able to kick their ass. But that's an insufficient body of work in my judgment by which you can say the Russians are good at ground combat, because historically, they really aren't. And a lot of people either gave the Russian army too much credit when they first rolled into Ukraine last week, or they've just forgotten how wars work, because there seemed to be a common belief that the Russians were just going to roll over the Ukrainians within a matter of hours or days, that a dominant Russian victory was going to be some sort of fait accompli. But that is not how wars work, boys and girls. You don't invade another country and have everything wrapped up in a pretty bow within 48 or 72 hours. Even the historical contests that we regard, and not incorrectly, as terrible ass-kickings, they took weeks or months to accomplish. When the Germans rolled into Poland on 1 September 1939 with the most advanced mechanized fighting force in world history up to that point, that was being opposed by Polish horse cavalry and a Polish air force that was flying World War I vintage wood canvas biplanes, it still took over a month for the Poles to be fully subdued. And the same deal with France. We think of the Battle of France as an embarrassing cakewalk for the Germans, which it of course was, but it still took 7 weeks to get from the first thrust through the Ardennes at the end of April 1940 to the signing of the French capitulation in the railway carriage at Compiègne on 22 June. And hell, even our initial conquest of Iraq in 2003 took 3 weeks to accomplish, and that was one of the most hilariously lopsided contests in the history of armed conflict. So we've got 2 factors here that work against the lazy assumption that this was going to be an easy walkover in favor of the Russians. First, it's just not possible to conquer a nation of 44 million people and a landmass of some 230,000 square miles within a matter of hours or days or a week. And second, the Russian army is just not a very good army. When you take the final 2 years of the Second World War out of the equation, when they were fighting against a vastly diminished opponent, The Russian army's history in ground operations, particularly with regard to attempted annexations of neighboring territories, is not an auspicious one. In fact, it's really quite embarrassing. Was there any reason in terms of manpower or technology why the Soviets should have lost to Finland in the Winter War in 1939-40? No, there was not, but they still got their ass kicked, pretty badly in fact, by Finland. And things don't get any better if we rewind to the First World War. In fact, if anything, they get worse, for the Russian army was being led by such stultifyingly incompetent men, including Tsar Nicholas himself, who thought it would be a lovely idea to go to the front lines and command the army personally, that it wound up leading to a general mutiny in the army, which then spread to the navy and which ultimately spawned the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. And there is one other fairly big problem the Russians have right now, and it's the fact that a defender, fighting on his own home soil, trying to repulse an invader, that guy is more motivated and enjoys the advantage of better fighting spirit and better overall effectiveness than an invader does. And this deficit in esprit de corps can cancel out even fairly huge disadvantages in manpower and technology, as the British and the Soviets, and finally we, the Americans, have all discovered when they attempted in succession to subjugate Afghanistan. But that's enough about silly foreign wars for right now. We have much more pressing matters to discuss, like what it's going to look like when the President of the United States, who assiduously avoids speaking in public for longer than 4 minutes at a time, has to give a State of the Union address. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where we've discovered that you can turn back any Russian ground invasion as long as you have a sufficient supply of vodka on hand. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And I've got 7 words for you. The 7 words you've been waiting to hear ever since 13 months ago. Joe Biden, State of the Union speech. And honestly, I have no idea how they're going to get him through this thing. State of the Union speeches, at least since the advent of the television era, they always last an hour at minimum, and often much longer than an hour. And in most cases, much of that runtime is taken up with long breaks for applause, during which the members of the president's party lustily cheer his many accomplishments in office. So, about that. This is just a personal hunch here, but Mr. President, I hope you don't go into this thing planning on using a bunch of 90-second applause breaks to pad your runtime, because that's probably the best case scenario if you're one of Joe Biden's handlers. In other words, if we get a whole bunch of really long, enthusiastic breaks for applause, then we can send him up there with a 3-paragraph speech and turn the thing into a 90-minute production, no problem. But Joe Biden's handlers are not that naive. At least I would hope they're not. In their heart of hearts, they know this guy has had the most disastrous first year of any allegedly elected president in the history of the Republic. They know there is no long list, or even a short one, of accomplishments for him to stand up there and recite. So there's only one more trick left to use, whereby you can try to turn this thing into an hour-plus long production without having to take any chances on the corpse of Joe Biden actually trying to get through an hour-plus long speech. And the way you do that is by introducing a whole bunch of guests and dignitaries and letting them be the cause of the applause breaks, which brings us back to the events in Ukraine. You may have seen, day before yesterday, I believe it was, the story about how the U.S. State Department had been just begging and pleading with President Zelensky to flee the country and come fly to the United States, to which Zelensky's reply, much to his credit, was, yeah, sorry, my country's being invaded right now, so I'm a little preoccupied at the moment. I don't need a free plane ride to America. What I actually need is more fucking ammunition. And I wonder if he even knew the real reason why they were trying to cajole him into leaving and coming to the U.S., because you and I damn well know what the reason is. It's so they could stick him in a seat at the State of the Union speech, probably right in between Dr. Jill Biden and Tony Fauci, and Joe Biden could give him some fawningly ass-kissing introduction and then go ahead and cue the 3-minute applause break. And make no mistake, nobody in our government actually gives a crap whether Vladimir Zelensky lives or dies. They just needed a stage prop, and they thought he would make a good one. And you remember how much anticipation there used to be leading up to Trump's State of the Union speeches? When the Democrats would spend the preceding 10 days to 2 weeks trying to figure out which acts of performative outrage they were going to be engaging in. So in 2019, you had that ridiculous female dick measuring contest between Pelosi and AOC, where AOC thought she was the queen bee, the chief hen of the roost, because, oh my God, guys, look at what I have accomplished here. I convinced all these other dumb women to dress up in all white like we're going on a field trip to the Mormon temple or something. And we are turning our backs on the bad orange man each time he says something that's bad and orange. And isn't that like so much fun and so original, you guys? And then Pelosi says, yeah, hold my beer, kiddo, and starts tearing the speech into 1,000 little tiny bits as soon as the president finishes his remarks. Now remember, ladies and gentlemen, these are the people who want you to know that they are the adults in the room. The sober, dignified professionals who care deeply about upholding the sanctity of our nation's institutions, and they demonstrate the depth of their caring and their professionalism and their emotional maturity by tearing up papers and wearing special outfits. So much dignity, so much decorum, I don't think I can stand much more. Now, you remember that congressman back in 2009, I think, who called Obama a liar during his first State of the Union speech? And remember how everybody in the Democrat media complex acted like it was the most scandalous thing that had ever scandalized the House chamber? And remember how all those same people celebrated Nancy Pelosi when she tore up Trump's speech right in front of his face just to be an asshole, like she had done some great and honorable thing? And you have to love selective moral standards, don't you? Because the bad orange man is so very bad and so very orange that when you're rude to him, you're really being classy and dignified. It's sort of the same tortured logic whereby the most racist people in the country can run around calling themselves anti-racist with totally straight faces. Or whereby people who are clearly and obviously engaged in magical religious thinking for purposes of political expediency can claim to be following the science, or taking a data-driven approach. And speaking of following the science, you'll be pleased to hear that the science has just changed as of today. And according to a rigorous scientific analysis by that noted epidemiologist, Dr. Nancy Pelosi, America's fourth greatest doctor after Dr. Jill Biden, Dr. Pepper, and Dr. J, she says the China virus will be officially vacating Capitol Hill just in the nick of time so everybody can attend Joe Biden's State of the Union speech with their faces gleefully uncovered. But we couldn't lift the mask mandate yesterday, or last week, or last month, because according to Dr. Pelosi, the virus has agreed to leave the building tomorrow, but not one moment sooner, because science. But as for the rest of us, we plebes out here in the hinterlands, if we've got 3 Joe Biden State of the Union speeches left to get through, I think it stands to reason we should make things slightly more interesting by inventing an official Joe Biden State of the Union drinking game. I mean, if there's anything we know for sure about Joe Biden as an orator, it's that the amount of sense he makes is inversely proportional to the alcohol intake of the listener. And we also know he enjoys stealing speeches from obscure British Labour MPs, but that's not important now. So how about, for rule number 1, you have to take 1 drink each time Joe gets defeated by the teleprompter. So if this winds up being an hour-long speech, you may wind up needing to be treated for acute alcohol poisoning, but that's just the way these things go. And speaking of that, while we're on the subject, I don't know who writes Joe's teleprompter text, but my God, seriously, whoever it is, stop using the word noting. This guy is totally incapable of telling the difference between the word noting and the word nothing. So each time he's reading a speech and he gets to the word noting, he says nothing. And then one of 2 things happens. He either gets cranky and frustrated and tries to say the sentence over again, or he just keeps going and winds up with a sentence that doesn't make the slightest goddamn bit of sense. Rule number 2. You have to take 1 drink each time Joe says, "I'm serious," or "I'm not joking." Which is one of his more bizarre late-period rhetorical affectations because it's something he says with a fairly great degree of frequency, but the weird part is he only says it when it's neither appropriate nor applicable to the thing he's actually saying. So he'll make some perfectly serious statement without a hint of apparent irony. Nobody in the room is laughing or chuckling or guffawing or anything, and then after one of those signature several seconds long Joe Biden moments of awkward silence, he suddenly blurts out, "I'm serious, I'm not joking." Oh, okay. It hadn't occurred to anyone that you were joking because the thing you said didn't have the appearance of a joke, but thanks for clearing that up, I guess. Rule number 3, you have to take one drink for each syllable that Joe omits from the phrase President of the United States. In other words, if he follows his normal practice and reduces it to something along the lines of President of the United States, that is 5 syllables omitted, thus 5 drinks. Rule number 4, take one drink each time he leans in close to the mic and does that creepy whispery thing he does. Rule number 5, take one drink each time he says something nice about Kamala Harris. Now hopefully this one will help to stave off the alcohol poisoning. Rule number 6, take one drink each time he points out that his new Supreme Court nominee is a strong, powerful black woman of color who's black and a woman. And since they failed at convincing Zelensky to show up, we should expect Judge Brown Jackson to receive at least 3 separate introductions, which should account for a good 5 to 6 minutes of applause breaks. Rule number 7, take one drink each time Joe tells a childhood anecdote that is obviously and laughably false, but it has to be a new one, not one of the ones we've heard before. So if he tells the story about wrapping a motorcycle chain around Corn Pop's head, or the story about how he and his dad watched a couple of gay men tongue wrestling each other on the streets of Wilmington, Delaware in 1956, or the story about how he got arrested trying to bust Nelson Mandela out of prison, or the story about how he flew to Israel to plan strategy with Golda Meir during the 6-Day War, none of those will require a drink. It will need to be a brand new entry in the Joe Biden Bullshit Hall of Fame. Rule number 8, take one drink each time Joe claims to have created more jobs in his first year than any president in history. This is going to happen at least 4 times. Write it down, and it's a spectacularly false claim. But when you're putting lipstick on a pig, you don't have time to bitch about the color. Rule number 9, take one drink each time Joe claims to have single-handedly defeated the China virus, and another drink each time he casts moral aspersions on the unvaccinated, and another drink each time he says somebody isn't black. And I think that's probably a sufficient number of rules, but you know what would be even more fun than a drinking game? You know what would make this event fun as hell? 3 words, Trump live stream. Seriously, if Trump put up a live stream just of him reacting to the Joe Biden State of the Union speech, I would pay for that. I would buy a membership to whatever he was selling. I don't care. Just shut up and take my money. And I guarantee you the Trump reaction live stream, even if you had to pay for it, would get 10 times as many viewers as the actual speech. No problem. The interesting thing for me tomorrow is going to be watching the Democrat members to see how hard they try at putting a happy face on this disaster of a presidency. Joe Biden already, at the 13-month mark, is so politically toxic that nobody in his own party wants to be seen anywhere near him. So I would expect that any cheering we hear from that side of the aisle tomorrow will probably be tepid at best, along the lines of a polite golf clap, as opposed to the type of cheering that says, "Yup, that's my guy, that's my president, that's my leader, that's the man I'm following into the breach." Maybe for next year's State of the Union, I'll put up a live stream of myself playing the drinking game, and the audience can spend the latter half of the broadcast wondering if I'm dead or just passed out, which, incidentally, is the same thing people often wonder about Joe Biden. And we will leave it there for tonight. I'll be back Wednesday with reactions to the big speech tomorrow and thoughts on whatever the latest developments are in Ukraine, whatever those developments wind up being. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching. Have a pleasant tomorrow. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.